So I know we saw a couple of different clips in there, and feel free to pull from either one of the three clips. But what challenging behaviors did you guys notice? Aggression. I think it might be safe to say everyone noticed that one. Do you guys notice any others? Go ahead.
I was going to say tantrums.
Tantrums.
Non-compliance.
Non-compliance, okay. I noticed that in the last video with the child who was, you weren't really, or at least my attention wasn't drawn to him until he started screaming, and then your attention was drawn to him. Maybe that's a hot button of mine. Did you guys notice any others?
I would say the teacher in the last one bothered me. Like the kid with the dinosaur was harassing the kid with the mullet in the beginning when another little kid ran away, and she was still sitting right next to them, did nothing, went for the other kid, who, I mean, his issue was he didn't want to sit down. Well, these other two children were like beating each other up right next to her, and she was not addressing it. And then as soon as she did, the other kid ran away anyways. Like she definitely could have addressed it before the other child who didn't want to sit. Like that was not an issue. But that really bothered me.
So maybe her, but I think that's a perfect, to bring us back to our hot buttons, that could be a perfect example of that. Maybe her hot button is a child who won't sit. Maybe that just really, really bothers her. So that affected her behavior. She, instead of prioritized the children who were physically hurting one another, she went and focused on that child who wouldn't sit. So it's just, an important thing to remember when you're in your own classrooms.
Well, and she said, do you see your name on this list for centers? There's your name. You should be at the center. Sit. So she was really rigid in her thinking rather than,
Like
you said, prioritizing. So.
Whereas that child probably wasn't like, my name on the list? All right,
Oh,
I'm going to
yeah,
go sit
that's right.
until I see my name on the list. I would love to see that child. But yeah, no, those are all good observations. Thank you guys for
This
sharing.
first little boy, clearly there was some impulsivity and aggression there, but it was sort of a short video, it was hard to tell, but he seemed to be having a big challenge in entering play with the other kids. I mean, he was sort of kind of, it looked more like he was playing more next to them and not with them. And you'd have to see more to kind of know if he was wanting to play by himself or if he was wanting to play with them, but he seemed to lack the skills to effectively engage and maintain play with that other group of kids.
And I think that's a great observation to make. It's always tough. We've identified that a lot with these videos. You want to see what happens 10 minutes beforehand and 10 minutes afterwards. So it's tough not to be able to see that. But one of the challenging behaviors that I noticed that I think sometimes could, maybe go overlooked in a classroom, because the priority needs to be the children that are whacking each other in the head because they're hurting each other. But did anyone notice the other child that took off and isolated himself? And he put I think a fire hat or some sort of hat on his head. And then another child came over to him, looked at the hat, and that child who had isolated himself took off the hat, threw it at the other kid, and then went back to doing something by himself. I thought, of course I've seen this video like 8 times when I'm prepping for this, so it's easy for me to notice those things. I'm sure it'd be very difficult in a classroom setting when there's a lot of kids running around. But I think it's a good reminder to try as hard as you can to, notice those challenging behaviors that may not be as obvious as the two children beating each other. So this next slide is actually, I think, maybe one of my favorite slides in this whole session. I can imagine that this is something that all of you guys have talked about in the past, but we know that behavior equals communication. We know that challenging behavior doesn't just happen for no reason. Challenging behavior is most often related to some skill deficit, and it's usually telling us that the child is not able to perform a skill or perform a task, versus they will not do those things. So I am incapable of completing a task, I am incapable of getting what I want, versus I will not do that, versus non-compliance like you were talking about. I think that's a really, really big thing to remember. Does everyone understand what I'm saying when I talk about that? Yeah. So we know that challenging behavior works. We know that challenging behavior, it is something that's persistent, it lasts over a long period of time. And therefore, since it is lasting over a long period of time, that's showing to us that the child is somehow getting what they want. Whether they're gaining access to something like your attention or another child's attention, or they're gaining access to a thing, to the fire truck that little Johnny always wants. I don't know why I always use that example. It's Johnny and a fire truck. I think I got it from Catherine. But it also can be avoiding something that they don't want to do, a task they don't want to complete, such as washing their hands, or, you know, protesting something that they just don't want to be a part of. But what we really want to remember is that challenging behavior works. So next we're going to do there's no time set. Actually, it's been an hour. Why don't we go ahead and take a couple-minute break? Does everyone feel like 5 minutes would be okay with them? That sound good? Okay, so we'll go ahead and take a 5-minute break. So if you could come back like right at 2 o'clock or a couple minutes after, that would be great.